Welcome to today's Research Spotlight talk. We're broadcasting live from the Yale Peabody Museum, which is many of you know, it's undergoing renovation and will be reopening again in the spring. So stay tuned. But for now, we are at least able to sit here and broadcast from here. My name is Katrina Damrell. I'm a Master's of Environmental Management student at the Yale School of the Environment. And I'm also the Research Spotlight Assistant at the Peabody Museum. The Research Spotlight series is the Peabody's Graduate Student Speaker Series. We highlight different grad students who do the research in connection with the museum's collections. So just a few housekeeping details to run by everyone before we start the webinar. We've disabled the chat function because it is just a Zoom webinar, but we do have the Q&A function. So if you have any questions, please submit them using the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. You can also submit questions at any point during the webinar. And we typically receive more questions than we have time for. So if that is the case, I apologize in advance, but we'll be able to connect you with Mansa in hopefully answering those questions. And finally, our program is being live captioned by Ramona, who's off screen here. So you can turn on captioning in the menu, usually in the bottom bar of your Zoom window. And thank you again, Ramona, for helping us. And also off screen is my colleague, David. So thank you, David and Chris on team 2 for making this all happen today. So we're joined here today with Mansa Srivastav. And Mansa is a Ph.D. candidate in Yale's Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. She grew up in Delhi, India. Her work focuses on understanding how plants move around Earth in deep time, so thinking about millions of years. Mansa's research combines evolutionary biology, botany, and taxonomy to study how alpine plants of the Himalayan mountains are adapting in a warming world. Her talk today will illuminate the complexities and challenges of studying alpine plants. She definitely has a lot of stories. And she will specifically tell the evolutionary story of the radial flowered honeysuckle plant group, which has a very long name, is a beautiful flower. And they can be found throughout the Himalayas. And with that, I'll pass it off to you, Mansa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Katrina. Okay, so I'll just start my talk. I'm ready to go. Okay. Okay. You can see my laser pointer. Okay, fine. Okay, so scientists estimate that there are about 8.7 million species on the Earth. And out of those, 86% in the on the land and 91% in the ocean are actually still waiting to be discovered. And these numbers don't even include things like bacteria. So why is it important to know what species exist and to keep discovering new ones? Well, the first good reason is that we can save a species from extinction only if we know that it exists. So these photos show different critically endangered and threatened plants and animals. But if we didn't know that they existed, then we wouldn't even have a chance at saving them. And then the second good reason for knowing what variation exists out there is that it has very important applications for us. For example, we see news of new COVID-19 variants emerging every few months. But if no one was keeping a track of these variants, then we wouldn't even know how to deal with them and survive. And then it's important to know what species exist because it is very important for fundamental research in so many fields. To give you an example, penguins are only found in the southern hemisphere. But to know why they're only found there, we first need to know how many species of penguins exist, and then only can we start asking why they're only found here, not up in the north, etc. So it's important to know what species exist, but what is a species? So there are several ways of defining a species, and this definition has changed over years and centuries. But the definition used by most of the evolutionary biologists today is that species are independently evolving entities, speaking in a genetic sense. And I'll explain what that means later. But for now, different species are usually not able to mate successfully, and different species usually differ in some traits. For example, in how they look, which you can clearly see in terms of zebra and giraffe, they are very different in how they look. But genetic differences are the most reliable for telling about species because things can look similar even though they are not closely related. So that's the definition of species. So how do evolutionary biologists go about determining whether a species is new or not? Let's say that there's a plant which looks like this, and then someday some botanist discovers a plant which looks like this. So very, very similar to this one, but has purple flowers instead of yellow ones. So how do we know whether this is the same species as this or just something different? Um, so the first step evolutionary biologists take is to compare their genetic material, which could be DNA, RNA, proteins, etc. And ideally, we should get DNA from multiple individuals of both yellow flowered and purple flowered plants uh, so that we can increase the accuracy of a result. DNA, very, very simplistically speaking, is made of 4 subunits, which are abbreviated as A, T, G, and C. And then DNA of any organism is a very long string of these ATGCs in different frequencies and combinations. So to test if the yellow flowered and the purple flowered plants are same or different species, we would need to extract the DNA, which just for the sake of example would look like these short fragments. So we can see that at the first position, all the yellow and the purple flowered plants have the same subunit, which is A. Then similarly at the third subunit, they all have the same, then similarly at third position, they have the same subunit, which is C. But at the 7th position, you can see that the yellow flowered individuals have G, but the purple flowered ones have T. So scientists have developed different methods which take these similarities and differences into account, which helps us to determine if two things are same species or different species, or in other words, if they're independently evolving or not. And one such very frequently used analysis is what is called a phylogenetic tree. So what's a phylogenetic tree? Well, it's basically a tool which is used for determining evolutionary relationships between some things. And these take an information in the form of DNA or RNA or other genetic material, and then they output figures like this, which show evolutionary relationships between some entities. Here, for example, between me, my sister, and my cousins. So all these branches are showing the relationships. All the nodes, which are these things highlighted in these red circles, denote ancestors. And all the tips, which is me, my sister, and my cousins, denote the descendants. And there is a component of time here. So time is running from left to right. And the way we read these trees is that the more recently two tips share an ancestor, the more closely related they are. All I'm trying to say is that I and my sister are more closely related to each other genetically than me and my cousin, because I and my sister share our parents, whereas I and my cousin share the grandparents who are further back in time. So we can use this logic of evolutionary relationships to figure out if something is a new species or not. So for example, going back to the flower scenario, this figure is denoting the relationship between the yellow and the purple flowered individuals. And this figure here would suggest that the purple flowered individuals are genetically mixed with the yellow ones. So in this case, the purple flowered individuals would not be a new species. But if the relationship would look like this, then it would mean that the purple flowered individuals are actually genetically different. Or in other words, they are independently evolving from the yellow ones because they are on their own branch of this tree, on their own line. And hence, they could potentially be a new species, of course, depending on many, many more analysis. And we should ideally look for other traits which would support this relationship besides difference in the flower difference. Because the more the types of evidences we have supporting that the purple thing is evolving on its own, the more certain we can be that the purple flowered thing is a new species. And I just want to say that even if you don't get all this, you will still be able to understand the rest of the talk. This is the most technical part of all this. Okay, so I have hopefully roughly explained to you how evolutionary biologists go about determining whether a species is new or not. So now I'll come to the main part of the talk, which is to know how many species of radial honeysuckles exist, which is a plant group which is found mostly in the Himalayan region. So I'm sure everyone has heard of Himalaya. The Himalaya is a mountain chain. It lies in Asia. It runs east to west. And next to Himalaya is this plateau known as Tibetan Plateau. And there are these mountains here, mostly lying in China, known as Hingduan Mountains. And then there are mountains up here in the north in Central Asia. So all these mountains and plateaus, so Himalaya, Tibetan Plateau and all, so these started forming about 50 to 55 million years ago when the Indian plate went and rammed into the Eurasian plate. And this massive collision created the highest mountain peaks in the world, such as Mount Everest. So not surprisingly, there are many plant species growing here that specialize in living at high altitudes, including the plant group which I will talk about in detail today, the radial flowered honeysuckles. But it's hard to know how many species exist for these different plant groups. And that's because these plants are quite hard to collect. And there are two main reasons for that. The first is that these plants grow in very remote peaks and valleys, which don't necessarily have good road connections to them. And so it takes a lot of physical and monetary effort in order to go and collect them. And this always leaves a possibility that a species growing here can go completely unnoticed and it might even go extinct before it is discovered. The second reason why it's hard to collect these plants is that this region is a transboundary region, which means that the Himalaya, the Tibetan Plateau and all, these cover a lot of countries. So the system cuts across Afghanistan, Pakistan in west, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar in the south, China, Tibet in east, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and all in the north. And then collection in each country requires a permit, which can take a few months to more than an year, depending on the particular country, and also sometimes a hefty fee. And these countries don't necessarily get along with each other. So I'm from India. I can never go collect plants in Pakistan because India and Pakistan don't get along. But then plants don't care about all these political boundaries. So most of the plant groups are found in more than one of these countries. And you can imagine that this creates confusion because imagine that if the same plant is found in two different countries, but those countries don't have easy access to each other's biodiversity information, then there's a chance that the same species can be described by different names in different countries. For example, a plant here could go by the name X, and the same species could get discovered here and be called Y. So all this leads to overestimation, leads to inaccuracy, and all that hinders other aspects of Himalayan plant research. So to fill a tiny gap, a very, very tiny gap in this problem, we decided to figure out how many species make up this Himalayan group of plants, which are called radial flowered honeysuckles. So what are radial flowered honeysuckles? So these belong to a plant group called honeysuckles, or scientifically called Lonicera. And honeysuckles in total have about 140 species, but radial flowered honeysuckles make up a very small portion of that. And these are called radial flowered honeysuckles because look at how their petals are arranged. So these are arranged radially, whereas look at the flowers of all the other honeysuckles. So these have flowers looking like this, where 4 petals are going up and 1 petal is going down, so not radial at all. So radial honeysuckles are a very small group, but they show a lot of variation in how they look and where they grow. So they all have flowers looking like this, radial, pink and white. But then they show a lot of variation in other traits. So the length of the male and female sexual organs can be very long, or they can be very short. The fruit colors can be different. Some species have very big leaves, some have very small leaves, and they have different heights. So some species of radial honeysuckles can be more than thrice my height. Some can be just lying on the ground, and these grow in different kinds of places. So some of them are found under the forest canopy, some grow in cold deserts, and then some of them grow in alpines, which are the highest elevation places on the mountains. So how many species make up the radial honeysuckles? So to figure that out, we looked into works that people have done in different countries where this plant is found. And we found that there's some confusion regarding the total number. But it seems that there are at least 5 species, which I have here colored in different colors. And the basis for saying that these are 5 species is how they look. So which is all the traits which I just talked about. So difference in the length of the sexual organs, the leaf, fruit color, etc. Now, 2 of these species, the blue and the red ones, show a lot of variation. So scientists think that these have 3 varieties each. And there are some scientists who think that these 3 are not actually varieties. They have differences big enough to call them actually species. So which would add to 2 more species here and making this 7 in total. So you can see that there's some confusion. And this is how all these species and varieties are distributed. So their names are up here, but you don't need to read them because I will talk about them in terms of their colors. So radial flower honeysuckles are found in this area, which is the Himalaya. They are found here, which is the Himalayan mountains. They're also found up here in Central Asia, but they're absent from this core of the Tibetan plateau. So we collected multiple individuals of all species and varieties except for 1 species. And all the individuals collected, their locations are marked by these black rings, black circles. So you can see that we collected almost the entire range here, 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 up here. So I personally collected along with my collaborators in this part. And then we got material for the DNA for other individuals, so like here and here, from places known as herbaria, which basically store plants collected by botanists in these dried and pressed forms, looking like this. Okay, so I collected here in the Himalaya, and just to give you an idea of the scale, Himalaya is as long as US is from north to south. So it's an incredibly huge area and it's very stunning. And I'll show you some photos of the places I collected these plants from. So this is a glacial lake in Eastern Himalaya at like 5,500 meters. And the plant which you see here in the center, so that's one of the radial honeysuckles. So these plants can reach very high elevations. This is an alpine region in the Eastern Himalaya. Alpines are places at higher elevations in the mountains. This is a forest in Central Himalaya. This is in Western Himalaya. It's one of the valleys where Himalaya transitions from being wet to dry. And this is a cold desert in the extreme west of Western Himalaya, and it hardly gets any rainfall, as you can probably imagine. And that's me, very happy, but also very tired because I was looking for this individual like for like 10 days. And I was feeling that the plant may not have been very happy to see me because I was just like plucking leaves and all. I want to give you an idea of what the typical field collection looked like. So to collect just a single individual in the Eastern Himalaya, it took me 16 days because it took 7 days of reaching the location by first catching a plane and then train and then car and then horse. And then it took 7 days of trekking. And then we were stuck in the landslide for 2 days. And we had to stay in caves because it was raining too heavily to put up tents. And we walked on paths like these, so came from here, went there. So basically no path because no one else was there except us botanists. And we had to cross such rivers using moss-covered logs in heavy rains. And at one point, I fell down a very high cliff somewhere behind these mountains and almost died, but then got stuck in a tree and was saved by my field assistants. So I feel very lucky to be talking to you about all this. And it took me almost an year's worth of time over a few summers to collect all these plants because all these reasons. So now I'll show you the results of all that collection. So I told you that radial honeysuckles are supposed to be 5 species, and 2 of them have 3 varieties each. So we wanted to know, and this the 5 species and 3 varieties is based on how these plants look. So we wanted to know if this was also supported by the genetic data. So we extracted DNA from all the individuals we collected, and then we built this tree, the phylogenetic tree, which is the this tool I talked to you about in the starting of the talk, which basically shows evolutionary relationship between entities. So all these names are the names of the individuals we collected, and all these lines are showing the relationship between them, and all these vertical bars here are showing different species. So these are supposed to be 5 species, but you can see that there are only 4 colors here. There's blue in 2 parts, in 2 shades. There's yellow, there's red, and there's green. So what's happening? Where is this 5th white species? So it turns out that the white species was actually genetically embedded in this red one. And so based on this one individual, we propose that it should not be recognized as species, but then future studies should look at more individuals and confirm that. And then why is this blue in 2 places? So it turns out that one of the varieties of this blue species was actually not part of the blue species at all. It actually was more closely related to this yellow one. And so this should definitely be recognized as a new species. And this was a very surprising result for us because just see how these are distributed. So these lines show the distribution of these yellow, light blue, and the dark blue species. So based on how these plants look, it was thought that this light blue thing was a variety of the dark blue species. And it also makes sense because they are just next to each other geographically. But this was not found to be the case based on the genetic analysis. Instead, it was found that this light blue species is actually more closely related to the yellow one, which is far away in the west, and there's all these gaps in between. Then the blue species had 2 more varieties. So these differ by whether the leaves are covered by white hair, as in here, or not. And we found them to be genetically mixed with each other, as you can probably see from the 2 different colors, the purple and the blue. So on the basis of genetic data, these 2 varieties should no longer be recognized on only this blue species as a whole. And then this red species was supposed to have 3 varieties, which mainly differ by the plant height. So one of the varieties is taller than me. One is just this like small stick on the ground with like some leaves. And then one of them is intermediate. And then again, based on the genetic analysis, we found that these are mixed with each other, as you can probably see from the different colors. So again, molecular data does not support the recognition of these varieties, but only the red species as a whole. We did some other analysis to confirm the results of the previous one. These are called structure and PCA of SNPs. And they basically gave the same result, which is that this light blue species is not closely related to the dark blue one, but actually more closer to the yellow one, which you can clearly see here. And here as well, because these light blue circles are closer to the yellow ones rather than to the dark blue ones. And the white species was found to be part of the red one, so you don't see any white bars or any white circles here. So basically, before our study, radial honeysuckles were thought to be 5 species, 2 having 3 varieties. There was confusion whether these were species or varieties, and this was all based on how these look. And after our genetic analysis based on many individuals, we found that these are 5 species, yes, but not the same 5 as these, because this white species actually was embedded in the red one. This light blue variety turned out to be a new species, and then none of the other varieties held up. Okay, so now I want to show you something interesting. So we sampled an individual from here in Central Asia, and we thought that it belonged to the yellow species. But then in these analysis, it was actually found to be clustering with the light blue species. So what this suggests is that there could have been past mating between the yellow and the light blue species. And I say in the past because there are these huge gaps in the distribution today. So we would need to do more analysis after doing collections in these parts marked, highlighted by the question marks. But if the past mating does get supported, then it would mean that the yellow species, the light blue, and the dark blue one are forming a ring around the Tibetan plateau. And these kinds of rings are formed when there is an inhospitable area in the center, surrounded by all these places which are suitable for growth. And these could form, for example, by, like a plant could evolve here, and then it would move around the circle, tracking all the places where it can grow in. But by the time it reaches the end of the ring, it becomes so different from the starting point that these are no longer sexually compatible. They cannot mate with each other. And Himalaya, Tibet, this region makes the perfect landscape for these kinds of things to happen, because there is an inhospitable Tibetan plateau in the center, surrounded by all these mountains and deserts, which support growth. In fact, people have found a ring species of bird in this region. Okay, so we found that real honeysuckles are 5 species, and this is how they are all distributed. And the key has names, but again, you don't need to read them. So we wanted to know where these species originated, and then in which direction they moved around. So based on the analysis I showed you before, it seems that most of the Himalayan species, which are all the species here, most likely originated in the east, and then they moved westwards. And this dark blue species, which is mostly found in the Hindwan Mountains here, most likely originated in the south and then moved northwards, but then also westwards towards the Himalaya. We also found evidence of barriers and movements for some of these species, which are basically areas that species found hard to cross or were just not able to cross at all. So there are 2 such barriers. There is one here, which is between Western Himalaya and Central Himalaya. And there's another one here, which is between Central Himalaya and Eastern Himalaya. But why do these barriers exist at all? So the answer is moisture gradient. And that's because Asian monsoon evolved about 25 to 30 million years ago. And what happens every year during monsoon is that these moisture-laden winds start from the south, go towards the east, but by the time they reach the west, they become very weak. And moreover, there are all these high mountain peaks in between which block these rainfalls. So as a result of this, the eastern part of the Himalaya gets a lot of rainfall. It looks very misty like this. But then the western part, the western extreme, hardly gets any rainfall and it looks barren. So all this imposes all these barriers. Because you can imagine that if a species is adapted to living in the wetter parts, then it would have a hard time moving to the dry parts. And good examples of that are the yellow species, which is found only in the driest part of the Himalaya, and the species in green, which is found only in the wetter parts. So to summarize my talk, we found that radial flowered honeysuckles are 5 species, but not the same 5 as initially thought based on how they look, because one species was found to be embedded in another, and one variety turned out to be a new species. And we found evidence of barriers in movements of these species, and we also got a sense of the direction in which they moved. With that, I would like to acknowledge people who worked with me on this paper: Michael Donoghue, my PhD advisor, my collaborators in India, Amit Kumar and G.S. Rawat, Patrick for all the herbarium support, funding agencies, and I want to thank all the people who worked with me in the field. So my field assistants, volunteers, friends who helped me collect the plants, but I guess more importantly, made sure that I was safe and I came back alive. um, yeah, these are in different parts of the Himalayas. So this is like extreme west, and then this one is like where is it? This is in the eastern part. So you see one is very dry and one is like very green. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, okay, so thank you.
That was wonderful, Mansa. Yay. And I am also very glad that you made it off the cliff and off of the trees. What a wild story. I can't even imagine what that must have felt like. Millions of years in the span of a minute, I'm sure. Wow. Thank you. That your presentation was wonderful. And let's see what we have for questions. And I know I have a few questions, and I know David also has a few questions as well. So let's see. Allison is asking if these honeysuckles germinate via seeds, will any samples be offered to the Kew Gardens Millennium World Seed Bank in the UK and or an equivalent depository in the US?
So these plants do grow by seeds, and they also do very well if we just use the stem. So yeah, it is possible. But like we'll need to put the proper permits in place if we go and collect the seeds from there. Yeah, actually, so two of these species grow in the Royal Botanical Garden, so
Okay.
they could just get those from there. Yeah, yeah. But I can help with that if they want to get it in the collection.
Nice. And then the same Allison is asking, did you get to name the new species?
So I technically did, but then it used to be called variety minuta. So I think I would just prefer to use that, just continue with that name. Yeah.
To use, oh, okay. Wait, who made that?
So this was done. Someone named this thing long time back. I think more than 150 years ago as a variety. So we would just use that name but as a species.
As a species.
Yeah,
I see.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Samantha is asking, does ecotourism affect any of these species either in a positive or negative way?
So positive way, I don't know, because I think like plants are not like the charismatic things which people go to look at. Maybe animals, yes. Like I don't think anyone even notices the radial flowered honeysuckles there. But the negative effects, yes. So the thing which we think is a new species, that has like a very tiny distribution, and all these countries are developing, so they are undergoing a lot of road construction, all this that. So yeah, I mean, I don't think ecotourism is helping it a lot. At least the way it is happening right now with like 4 lanes and like getting rid of all the plants next to the road. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And then Samantha is also asking if there are any medicinal properties of the Himalayan radial honeysuckle.
I am not aware of any medicinal property. People do eat fruits of one of these species. They have like these red juicy berries, and people in the West Nepal, I found that people actually eat them, and they have a name for it. But otherwise, I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any medicinal use of them.
Do you know what they taste like? People describe. Did you try them?
I tried them.
Did you like it, or
it was sort of like a berry, but not as sweet as the berries which we. No, not the berries which we use commercially. So not the radial honeysuckles, but there's another honeysuckle which actually has which is actually developed by the horticultural industry for eating, and that's called huskap. If anyone wants to know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Eva or Ava, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Eva's asking, how did you plan for the trip through the Himalayas? And I imagine it is a lengthy process.
So it was a very lengthy process. So first of all, I wanted to figure out where I should go and look for the plants. So for that, I visited several herbaria. So both like the big herbaria in the world, like Kew and RBGE, I got like specimens from there and figured out where the plants are found. But then also local herbaria in all these countries, so in Nepal, in India, in different states. And then I just figured out how to go to those locations. But it required a lot of planning because some locations could be reached only by foot, and then we would need some local person to go with us. And some of the places were easy to reach by the car, so you would just go and hire a car, and then you would just go there. So, but it took a lot of planning. We didn't know if we would be able to find a place to sleep, if we would be able to get food or not. So we used to carry tents with us all the time. Yeah, a lot of planning.
It's truly an adventure for sure. And then David and I have, and audience, feel free to chime in if you have more questions. But David and I have a few questions for you. I'm curious, what inspired you to study alpine plants in the first place? Yeah.
So I always wanted to study plants ever since I was a kid. But after I finished my master's, I went as a volunteer for someone else's PhD project to collect plants. And that was the first time I went to these alpines. And I used to think in my mind, oh, these high elevation places, like hardly anything will grow, like.
Yeah.
But when I went, it was like a carpet full of like pink flowers, like at that time, there were some seasonal flowers. And I was like, wow, like how did these things manage to survive? Like how did they adapt to living in such conditions? And then there's also so much heterogeneity in like the alpine environment. There's like the river, so it's like very wet, and suddenly there's a scree, and then it's very dry, and then yeah, so it just boggled my mind how things came to adapt to live in such a harsh place. So that was my inspiration.
That's awesome. Yeah, nature is powerful. On that note, I'm wondering, how is climate change impacting radial flowered honeysuckles in their ranges? And a few slides ago, you were showing the map of the Himalayan and the kind of the circle that the different species have made around the Tibetan plateau. And I noticed when you're talking about the local climate, the east being more wet and the west being drier. I think it was the red colored species.
Yeah, which is one throughout.
Yeah. Would that, like, in regards to climate, I guess the first question again, how is climate change impacting the honeysuckles? But then are there certain species that are maybe queued up to adapt better?
So I'm not sure how they will fare, but the thing with all alpine plants, like what is said, is that they that until a certain point of time they can keep climbing up, tracking the temperature, but then you can only like go to a certain point. Like the mountains are not infinite, so I'm assuming that there would come a point when things won't have any place to go. So this would probably be the same for radial honeysuckles also. Um, and then I think because these different species live in such different kinds of environments, like one is in the cold desert, one is in these like forests. So I think they would adapt differently. Like they would fare differently.
Okay.
Yeah, depending on what exactly happens in that part of the environment where they live in. But I think the red one, which is found throughout,
Right.
so that's found in all of these places. That's found in the temperate forests, in these forests, in cold deserts, in alpines. So it already has some kind of evolutionary toolkit to be able to adapt to different things. So I think that will probably do the best. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. It's interesting. David was wondering if there's any evolutionary advantage to being radial flowered, and are radial flowers somehow more attractive to pollinators, or maybe to certain pollinators?
Yeah. So I think it could be possible. So there are two more groups of honeysuckles which have reached this part
Okay.
at the Himalaya, and they have also like there's one species in cold deserts, one in these forests. So they all seem to be doing fine. Like all of them, I don't think radial honeysuckles seem to be showing any kind of advantage in that sense. But then at these high elevations and the alpines, there are only so many pollinators. So radial flowers are not they are because they are radial. I think they do not require very specialized kind of pollinators. So they could be pollinated by many things. So maybe they have advantage in that sense. Maybe. Yeah.
Interesting. I had no idea. I feel like I'm learning so much about plants and flowers. It's really fun. And then I'm wondering, well, actually, no, David has a question here. Are there any radial flowered honeysuckles in North America or anywhere else in the world, or are they limited to parts of Asia where you
Yeah, so the radial flowered honeysuckles are only and only found in just specifically that part of the region which I told you about. Like all those points which I showed, they're only found there. Yeah, but honeysuckles are found like throughout the northern hemisphere.
Okay. Yeah. I think I'm familiar with the one that you've described. And I know growing up you can extract the nectar. It's really yummy. Yeah. Okay. And I think the last two questions for me, I'm curious, in your field work, have you seen any interesting wildlife or other plants that you were surprised to see?
Yeah, so I had a fan moment.
A fan moment?
Yeah, because there's this plant which I always wanted to see. It's called, the scientific name is Rheum nobile. So all alpine plants grow very close to the ground because it's so harsh. Like there's all these winds, and it's very hard to be tall and survive there. But this Rheum nobile, it's also called the glass house plant. It is very tall and it has these big bracts which are just like parts of the flower, which become big, and then they somehow act as a greenhouse, as a glass house. So that's how they generate their heat and are able to be tall.
Whoa.
And I saw it, and when I came back and I told the locals, they said that, oh, you are very lucky because this plant, whenever it sees a human being, it runs away. And I started laughing, and they're like, no, we are serious, it runs away.
Oh my gosh.
So that was a plant I really wanted to see, and I was able to see thanks to all this feedback.
Have you been back since?
No, but I do plan to go home next year, and I will again to the part where I almost died, but I won't go that far. But I'll go visit that part again.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if it ran away or not. Okay, and then we've got a new question in here. So Siddharth, you might be the last question for us tonight. Floral diversity in the Himalayas is so immense. How/why did you focus on Lonicera? And I apologize if I
Lonicera. Yeah. So this is so I was looking for, so when I came here for PhD, I was sure that I wanted to work on some alpine plant in the Himalayan region. And I was looking for different plant groups. And it so happened that my advisor got a grant to work on honeysuckles. So then we had the money for that. So then I crafted my thesis around the radial flowered honeysuckles which are found there. Yeah. So it was more of a logistic choice than anything else.
Interesting. That makes sense. Well, thank you so much, Mansa, for joining us. It was wonderful to hear your story and to be able to hear and see all your photos and hear your stories for sure. And all the research, and congratulations on completing your dissertation and graduating. It's so exciting. And you mentioned that you will be in the area for a postdoc after this. So you'll have to come back soon. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And if you're watching this recorded, it will be uploaded on YouTube. So I'm hope everybody can share it with the general audience. And there's also the Yale Peabody Museum has an entire YouTube channel. So there are the previous Research Spotlight talks. And the Research Spotlight series is wrapping up for the year. We will continue again in 2024 at the end of January. So stay tuned for that event coming up. Thank you again.